Good afternoon, and thank you to Aphasia Access for this opportunity to have this conversation, and we hope it really will be a conversation about teaching about the life participation approach to aphasia. Here you'll see, oh, I have to touch this, hold on here. It worked, okay. Here you'll see our committee members' financial and non-financial disclosures. And we hope that what will happen during this afternoon is that you'll become aware or more aware of some freely available resources for you to use while you're teaching others about Lpaa. We hope that we'll be encouraging you to think about how we're teaching others, and of equal importance really is to learn from you about additional resources that we need to create. And let me just make sure that I know where we are. Okay, so these were our objectives for today, and then let me tell you what the session's going to be like. We're going to very briefly review what was the purpose for the development of the academic modules, and at the same time, we're going to be asking you about your work in teaching about Lpaa. Janet Whiteside, Robin Pollens, Jodi Morgan will follow and give you a tour of the academic modules, and then I'll return to talk about a small sample of other resources. And lastly, Jess will guide us at the end to think about what our future conversations need to be and explore directions for the future. And so, why does teaching about Lpaa matter? And when we first did meet as a group to envision what has now become Aphasia Access, one of the central core goals was to make sure that there would be a group of clinicians, a group of speech-language pathologists who were going to be well prepared to practice life participation approaches to aphasia, but to also have places in which they could practice life participation approaches to aphasia. As a work group in 2015, a subgroup of the Aphasia Access Research and Education Committee, led by Mary Boyle, did ask this question, and it has resulted in coordination with the larger committee, which included Ellen Hickey at that time, and Jessica Richardson's. And we decided then to create academic modules. Now, the purpose of the academic modules was to allow instructors to easily embed or infuse content and learning experiences into both didactic coursework or clinical instruction, and at the same time meet academic standards from the Council on Academic Accreditation and also practice standards for clinical competence. As of fall 2018, the academic modules have been completed in its entirety and have been freely available on the Aphasia Access website, and there were thumb drives distributed at the American Speech Language Hearing Association in November. As our work has been coming to a close, we on the committee, now led by Jess as our chair, have been wondering about a couple of different things. One, to ask you, are the modules useful? Are you using them? Are they effective in reaching the audience that you want to reach? What are the next steps? What kinds of improvements could be made? And while we've been considering these next steps, we've been trying to take another step to consider how might what we are doing and what we are creating match with adult learning principles and practices. to think about how we're going to really engage who our learner is for learning about life participation approaches to aphasia, and particularly based on what we heard this morning, I think this idea of asking why does it matter to teach about Lpaa is even more important, considering who all the audiences may be. And so we want to know about you. We want to know what you think. There's a handout on your table in the center of the table, which is not colored as the one that you had this morning was, but should give you a structure, if you choose to use it, to guide you through the questions and guide you through the discussion about what we want to consider today. And so let's ask a question. And I am not keeping track, so I am going to have to do this better. So here we go. Who do you teach, or who would you like to teach about Lpaa? And if you want to use hands, if you want to use your paddles, we really would like to see. Who teaches speech-language pathology students? All right, and if it continues, keep your paddles raised. Hopefully by the end, we're going to have everybody's hand or paddle up. Who teaches other allied health students? Who teaches speech-language pathologists, practicing speech-language pathologists? Who teaches people who have aphasia? Who teaches family members, caregivers, friends? Are there other groups that we haven't mentioned? Who else? Researchers. Who else? Volunteers. Who else? Community members. Who else? Say it again. Physicians. People who are in medical practice. Nurses. Dining staff. Business people. Chaplains. Okay, so we have a lot of people, right? Does anyone have one more person you want to mention? Transportation folks? Politicians? Well, yeah, we said it. We said people who have aphasia. People who have aphasia. Is it pretty safe to say no one picks H here? That you're not teaching, you're not interested? Okay, next question. Where do you teach? Where do you teach? I teach, or at least I taught until December 31st, 2018, in this building in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Where do you teach? Do you teach in a university class or clinic? All right, hands up, good. Do you teach in a medical facility? Do you teach in a rehab facility? How about in homes? And at workshops? Where else do you teach? Online, excellent. Where else? Anybody else have other places where you teach? Community? I thought I heard a presentation here about teaching on campus on the sidewalks. That was yours over there, College of St. Rose, right? Yep. In prison. Social media. All right, so lots of settings to teach. And how do you teach? How do you teach? I chose this photo of my co-worker, Robin Pollens, to show her teaching quite a few years ago, actually, using some art medium at a local health fair in a community park, where our banner of hope, what did we call this thing? The banner of hope, which had been made by members of our group, was there to teach everyone who was at the health fair in the park about aphasia, and to participate about aphasia. So how do you teach? And with this, I will segue to Robin, who's going to tell us about the academic modules, give us the introduction, and begin the tour.
Okay, so hello everybody. The next section of our presentation will be about resources that you can use that can help in your teaching, since we just heard that everybody in this room educates about aphasia. And the very next portion will be specifically about the learning modules, and then we'll go on and talk about other resources besides the modules. And as Sandy mentioned, these modules, from what I can gather really, it came from the idea that there was a lot of enthusiasm about life participation approach to aphasia, and research developing about the topic, that there was some concern whether or not the information was being implemented in the clinical settings, and if the information had become immersed into the curriculum at the university setting. And so that was part of the hope of why these learning modules were created. Oh yes, and I need to do this too. There are 4 academic modules that are on the Aphasia Access website. These are the topics: evidence for Lpaa, key elements of Lpaa, assessment in Lpaa, and intervention in Lpaa. If you go to the Aphasia Access website, which I know probably everyone in this room has had the pleasure of going and seeing all the resources that are there, but if not, I recommend it. And if you go to the tab that says resources and go to the first drop-down from that, that is academic modules. And that's where you'll find the materials that we're about to talk about. So 3 of us are going to take a little walk with you through the modules and just talk about a few highlights of each one so that you're a little more familiar with them if you haven't had a chance to look at them yet. And I'm going to talk first a little about the one that's the evidence for Lpaa. And I should tell you, and it says right up here, this one was based on the presentation that Nina Simmons-Mackey and Aura Kagan did at the Aphasia Access Leadership Summit in 2015. And besides the link to this module, there is also a link to their actual video presentation that you can look at. We're so used to clicking something here. Okay. This module goes over 2 things: research supporting the need for a life participation approach to aphasia, as well as treatment and intervention research. The first series of slides talks about research supporting the need for Lpaa. So I put an example of this type of slide. This one is about environmental barriers. So the researchers looked at what was in the literature related to this important topic. They identified, these are studies that identified environmental barriers, and also that there were studies that show that these barriers could be reduced, and they came to this conclusion: intervention should address the environment to reduce and eliminate barriers. When I look back at this module to prepare for today, I thought this is one certainly you could use in a classroom, you can use in your clinic practicum, but this could also be used in other healthcare settings. When you're talking about access to healthcare, or you're talking about health literacy, things like that. There's many other slides related to research. There's one on communication partner training. There's one on immersive types of treatments, on psychosocial issues related to depression, the impact on the person with aphasia, their family members, as well as the impact on healthcare costs. So there's a series of slides briefly, succinctly stating something about research. After that, there's a series of slides related to treatment. And this is a nice short example, I thought it would be easy to see, That's related to low-tech AAC. And again, the people who created this one went through the research and pulled out some studies related to this one particular topic and reported the outcomes. There's other ones related to communication partner training. There's one related to immersive treatment, which they put together like the choir, the theater, things like that. And there's also some treatment outcomes related to multiple ICF participation domains. For all 4 of the modules that you're going to be hearing about, besides the PowerPoint, we created course module information so that if any of you are, especially if you're in a university setting and you have students, we have provided some sample test questions for you, as well as beautiful case study narratives, which I'm sure you can think about how you might use this on a test, on a final, or if you're not in the university, it could be that if you're presenting somewhere and you want to break up into small groups and discuss a case, this is all there for you. In addition to that, there are standards and guidelines there, which if you're making a syllabi, you might need to include that. There's additional learning materials, and there's a nice reference page. So it's kind of a whole package ready for you. The people who put together this evidence-based one did a nice job on the reference one. They categorized the references by topic, so that makes it really easy to look at. Okay, so that's this first module. And next, Janet is going to talk about the second module.
Hello. So I was charged to develop a module that would kind of distinctly tell us what are the key elements in Lpaa. And obviously at the time I'm now retired too, but I was teaching. And so it was kind of like, and this is, I'm going to go into the second objective here. It's like, how can we augment and extend and incorporate Lpaa into what, at least myself, I grew up with impairment-based therapy. So back in the 70s, we hardly had any therapy practices to use, and then we developed all of these impairment-based. But I always thought that I wanted my therapy to be more authentic, more impactful, and to me, that's what Lpaa did. So I think Dr. Worrell this morning used the word weave, and all of a sudden I thought in my mind, that's really what's happened to me in the past 20 years, is that I've woven together Lpaa with impairment-based therapy. That it's not so much a this and that or those, it's woven together now. I can't even tell it apart. You know, the Lpaa is just a part of what I do. It's a part of the aphasia house that I've passed on. And I hope that's true for you too. But there are still people out there that want to know, how is this different? You know, because we are proponents of something that encompasses more than maybe what impairment-based or what the medical model is. So that's what this module is to help you with. It's to help you if you're in the medical setting, if you're in academia, or even if you're in the SNF or with other colleagues, is how to help them to see how Lpaa comes around impairment-based, but then even goes beyond that. So this module will distinguish the key elements. We talked about the second one, and then I would say now, instead of construct a therapeutic environment, construct a mindset that encompasses the model of Lpaa. So what I did, the key elements that I talked about in my particular module, you'll see up there, we talked about outcomes, assessment, treatment, person's treated environment, and therapist role. And so I've just chosen 2 of those, and I'm so happy I chose outcomes because Dr. Worrell again talked about outcomes, and that is really where we begin. And I think so often, I remember telling my students, because they wanted to come prepared, you know, when they first met me and we were talking about our client, and they wanted to write their long-term goals and short-term goals, and I was like, how can you do that? You know, you haven't even talked to your client yet. So, you know, we have to start with the outcomes. And in the past, you know, I would have my list, you know, well now, how well are they at naming things and at discourse and at understanding and reading and writing? But equally, do we talk about and do we even interview and ask them about their engagement, their social connectedness, their well-being? Who else are they talking with? And I mean, this is huge to kind of introduce this, because, you know, I'm guilty of it, of being over here in the medical model for so long, and I've had an aha moment even today that if you were to read some of my POCs or some of my students' reports, on those, we may have had an appropriate long-term goal, but were my short-term goals back to being more very much impairment-based? Was I really writing goals that reflected what I believed in, but was I really teaching the student that? So that leads me into goals. And I just throw out a couple of examples in this particular module. So the goal may be client will participate in discharge planning. So we're talking more about acute care. So an impairment-based goal would be, let's make sure that they can respond to multiple choice questions. Okay, we got it. But maybe if we incorporated that more as an LPA, will the client engage in choosing healthcare options by indicating the preference? In other words, it's putting the value, the patient's value on being able to choose him or herself again. And in part of my retirement, I'm actually helping my sister-in-law who has a rare neurogenic degenerative disease. And I mean, I see it all the time. Are they talking to her? Are they asking her? And I mean, it gives her so much value, even though now all she can do is bat her eyes. But I immediately see what the medical person is doing or what the person at Lowe's does. You know, are they valuing her or are they talking to me? So changing our goals that say the client will engage in choosing the healthcare option, not just will the client answer multiple choice questions 80% of the time. And here's one more, a long-term goal, client will client will follow directions in his environment. Okay, so we could be writing client will follow 2 or 3 step directives. How many decades did I teach from that goal? But now client will accurately fill maybe the weekly pill box following directions. So I guess for me, I'm still on this journey, whether I'm retired or I'm still teaching or I'm still running the Aphasia House. And I hope all of us over the next 24 hours that we see ourselves on this continuum, that we see how we can maybe weave in a new way LPAA into wherever we are, whatever our environment is. And so we're hoping that these academic modules will just be one more resource for you in you sharing what we so believe in.
In this module, the goals were to think about differentiating or helping your people you're teaching, differentiating the difference between using impairment-based model of assessment and how it's different when we're thinking about life participation approach, and also what are the processes that we use to do that. I do want to also mention that in these last 3 modules, actually in each one we started with some basic information about life participation approach so that you can use all 4 modules in your class, but you can also choose one and use it and it'll stand up alone for a good teaching tool. So I've included in this assessment module this slide, which is actually in the one that you had made. I believe I got it from originally, which is reviewing the difference between an impairment-based assessment, which is looking at language with talking, reading, writing, listening, and modalities, versus the life participation approach, where you'll be looking at all of those domains of function, looking at the language, but also looking at the environment and the context, personal factors, emotional well-being. And another one of those in our wonderful drawing does say participation goals. And I was thinking today when Linda Worrell, in that wonderful presentation we saw about being an effective therapist, she did say at one point with goal setting that she thinks we should be doing goal setting first and then assessment. And I know what she means by that, so she's thinking if we find out that somebody wants to be able to read the sports page and talk about it, then you found that out, and then you do the assessment of their reading skills. I think that's what she probably meant. But what I hope is that when we use our life participation approach to assessment and use certain tools, that from that, we're actually doing a form of collaborative goal setting. We're actually hopefully learning ideas about the goals that these people want to have. And I'll give you an example. So then the slides have specific examples, and they do go across different areas to give examples and give people an idea that this does occur in all, the life participation approach assessment does occur in all settings. This one is about home care, and I am going to talk through this one because it's an example of how using the AFRAM approach gets incorporated. Oh, thank you very much. 2 people just informed me that I didn't put it up. Thank you. So this is one where the SLP came to the home and used a tool, used the COMAC, which is a self-report tool for seeing what kinds of activities somebody is engaging in, as well as a structured interview, and determined that the person wanted to be able to read more. But then thinking about the whole AFRAM model, the SLP thought about environmental factors, that he and his wife read in the living room every night after dinner together. Personal factors, they missed the social closeness of sitting on the couch together and reading. And then the language factors significantly reduced reading comprehension. So from putting that together, the identified Lpaa goal was that they would enjoy, that the patient would enjoy reading together with his wife using audiobooks accessed from the public library, which was new to them, and that's what the SLP helped facilitate. This module also reviews different ways, different methods for assessment in Lpaa. Standardized assessments, certainly. Self-report, such as the COMAC. There it is. Okay. Ethnographic interviewing, contextual analysis, and dynamic assessment. By that meaning seeing what happens when some communication attempts to be occurred, and what happens as a SLP if you try a different treatment, and how things might change in that regard. So the slides then give examples of each of these different methods of doing assessments. And here's an example. This one is using a standardized tool. The example here is using the CADL-3, the Communication Activities of Daily Living. So it tells the tool and tells the outcome. In this case, identified impairment in reading prescription instructions, and that he needed to be able to manage his medications at home independently. So there's a whole series of slides that specifically catalog for you some of the tools that are available and what kinds of outcomes you may get from it. Here's an example of a dynamic assessment, and I put this slide in because it's an example of using the interprofessional team when you're doing the Lpaa assessment. And this is a case of somebody in a skilled nursing facility where the team realized the patient was not learning safety instructions, not understanding safety instructions for using their walker. And the patient's goal was to be able to leave skilled nursing and live independently. The barrier was they weren't following these instructions or understanding these instructions for using their walker. And so the SLP went in with the PT, saw what happened when the instructions are being taught, and then did an intervention and tried using single key words of what the instructions were and teaching, educating the PT to say these same words for improving the outcome. The next series of slides in this are specific tools to use and an example result. So here's one slide using the tool, the LIVE cards, the life interest and values card, brief description, what it measures, and an example result. In this case, the person with aphasia wanted to resume traveling, and you'll see this right now. Okay. Series of slides like this. And finally, there's a reminder in it. When is the time for doing the assessment? Anytime. Right in acute care, right during active rehab, or any time in someone's life projection, as we've talked about at this conference so far, where new needs arise.
All right, I have the pleasure of talking about intervention in Lpaa. And so this is exciting to me, and I want you guys all pumped up because these are resources that are out there for us for free. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share them with you because I think there's a lot of work and thought that went into all of them, but it's also great resources. We've used them not only for speech pathologists, but also for folks like my physical therapy colleagues that come into the Aphasia Center that review some of these slides. So it's good for a lot of different disciplines, and I think it's good for a lot of different areas of speech pathology, whoever you are seeing, whatever area you are treating. I think this would be great modules for you. So the goals of the intervention are basically identifying aspects of intervention as they fit into the AFROM model, identifying areas in which Lpaa principles can be applied to aphasia intervention, access resources. And I think the great thing about all of these modules is we have links. So we kind of teach you, we give you a little bit of information, but we provide a lot of links to a lot of very, very helpful tools. It was really hard doing the intervention. They cut us down. You know, after about 100 slides, they said, you guys are cut off, no more. And so we had to really pipe it in, but we tried to give you the cheat sheets. So really it's a useful tool for everyone, speech pathologists, people who care. We have to remember intervention is action taken to improve a situation, to help people with aphasia. So I really feel like these modules are there for you. It's a beginning, it's a tool in your tool belt, but again, feel free to use them, and did I mention they're free? Okay, so that for me is a big thing. Thank you, Aphasia Access, for this, because I love free. This is one thing that I have to, we can't do an intervention model without a quote from Dr. Audrey Holland. So I think this was just a pearls of wisdom, and one of the things, she never knows how much I think she influences people, but we kind of based our whole intervention model after something she said, and yes, we take notes, and she doesn't know this is from 9 years ago. And I think I have a t-shirt with this on it. But it should be about, someone asked a question, how can you incorporate Lpaa into clinical practice? And she so eloquently said, it should be about any approach we use in intervention of aphasia. I believe the first thing that should occur to any of us when we choose any intervention approach is, how will this help the person with aphasia reconnect with his or her life? So intervention is anything that you do to improve a situation, and I really feel this hit home, Audrey's quote, and we tried to weave this into our intervention module. So we divided the modules into 8 different categories, as you can see, setting goals, and there's a lot about, we have some wonderful links, we have some examples of some goals. Talk about training communication partners, which is so integral into everything that we do and is such an important part of intervention. Working with people with aphasia to maximize all their communication modalities. How can we empower them to teach others about what works for them in communication? Because it's going to be different with every single person with aphasia. Incorporating technology. We heard some wonderful technology from our Lingraphica, our constant therapy friends. What are some simple things that we can help our friends with aphasia do with apps, with speech recognition, with things like that? Again, everybody is an individual, everyone responds to technology, but we felt that it was imperative to put it in our intervention module. Group-based services. There's a lot of great resources. One of the ones I love in there, and I have to plug it, Roberta Ellman's book on some group therapy. We put some of the resources in there, so as clinicians, it's all kind of pivotal in one spot, so that you can pick and choose, because there might be a paragraph from one book that really works, or a chapter from one book, but we try to compile it all for the busy therapists, the people who really care about intervention and aphasia therapy. Promoting communication participation, outings, how do we reduce barriers, how do we train people in the community, how do we help with that in the community, and of course advocacy, with a big focus on what is the importance of our people with aphasia as partners. They talk about and they advocate in the community. How can we help support them to be our advocates? And then, of course, we put all of these into the AFROM domains. And then there was some information we had about cooperative goal setting. And we titled it Why, and I think we should have titled it Why Not, because it's really so important. Because again, most people living with aphasia will be living with aphasia for the rest of their lives. So we all need to work collaboratively with people with aphasia and their families to establish the relevant and meaningful goals, and to make living successfully with aphasia a real possibility, and making sure those living with aphasia participate in those activities again, and then of course to foster hope and an optimistic outlook for the future. How? We gave you some phenomenal resources, and there's a lot out there, but again, we just wanted to pull them together so that people could have them in one place. So, how do we identify barriers, and then wonderful tools such as the Assessment for Living with Aphasia Toolkit, the Life Interest Value Cards, writing goals in authentic ways, and they talked a lot about the GAS and the SMARTER goals, and what we did is we put different links together for you so that you could click on it and learn more. There's no way, again, I got cut off at 100, but there was no way we could put everything in there. And so there's links to all these wonderful resources so you can pull together and decide for yourself. So again, this is just one of the intervention modules of the 4 modules. They're all fantastic, and I really hope that tonight, when you get done with all of your events at 11 o'clock, you guys are clicking on Aphasia Access, looking at this, because it is fun on a Friday night, I promise. It's very good information. And without further ado, I'm going to have Sandy come up and tell us a little bit more about resources.
So since we started this project, and since the larger committee, the Education and Research Committee, was thinking about directions, the resources to teach about Lpaa have really grown. And going back to this idea of thinking about what are the various kinds of tools that support learning, that support adult learning. When I was asked to, as part of this discussion, think about what else besides the academic modules, what else might we be thinking about, what else do we have, I used this list to be thinking about what else is out there, what else is it that we could be using as tools. And the number and type of tools, thanks to Jerry Hepner and others who have instigated the teaching and learning in communication sciences and disorders, the online open access journal. And Jerry, there's your fan club, makes it much easier to find resources that can be relied upon to allow us to instruct, to allow us to encourage people to learn. And so I'll show you this, and you're not meant to be able to read this. But I'll show you this because this is how I started out. I started out trying to match the type of learning strategy or learning tool with who the learner might be, who might best use, or who in the research was the student who was the learner in that particular study, with the tool or the resource that was available. And we had some active discussions among this presenting group about how far off track I was taking them in asking this question. But the reason you're not supposed to be able to read this is that as I was trying to dig into this idea a little bit more, what I realized that there were so many more resources available and there were so many other questions that I couldn't answer, that what really I was creating is perhaps a map for the future work that needs to be done. Because I started asking myself questions about, well, what about the significance of the age cohort of who the learner is? Is it really do I need to be considering whether my learner is 20 or my learner is, I mean, really, we're only thinking about adults, we're talking about teaching children about aphasia or life participation approaches to aphasia, but adults, what do we need to teach a 20-year-old versus what I need to teach an 80-year-old? Or from different types of groups of these working speech language pathologists or something else. And so I left the slide in to point out that I think this would be an interesting project. But in fact, since we began meeting to initiate, to begin what's become Aphasia Access, there really has been a marked change. That textbooks uniformly now are putting some content, more than a paragraph, about life participation approaches to aphasia, some even whole chapters, and some whole books dedicated to the ideas. I want to remind people that Aphasia Bank still does have resources for teaching, and that the videos that are linked to Aphasia Bank can be found here. That even other organizations, such as the patient-provider communication, do have resources that instructors could use to apply it to teach ideas related to life participation approaches to aphasia. And these were not readily available. They were not all available 4, 5, and 6 years ago. And let me just put in one disclaimer here before I forget. These lists are not meant to be all-inclusive, but just to point out these major categories where there's been improvement, but where there's still room for growth. There's watching and discussing. There's lots of places to find videos to watch, lots of places to find first-person accounts. What I don't know that there are places to find demonstrations of something like what we talked about this morning. I think the question Jackie Hinckley asked about whether speech-language pathologists who are using personal narratives have better outcomes. I don't know that we have video examples of speech-language pathologists engaged in that. Lots of role-playing and simulation examples from, I'm not with the same thing here, sorry. Simulations from the Aphasia Corner, aphasia simulations that Jackie Hinckley had made, to what are interprofessional simulations that we may be doing live, to remembering the last Aphasia Access meeting of whether we could be doing something with virtual reality. And I kind of hope somebody in the room here tells me you are doing something with virtual reality. Lots of webinars that someone can do in terms of self-education. case studies? Do we need more textbook examples of case studies that highlight Lpaa? What about the web-based instruction tutorials that some of us might be using, like the Master Clinician website or the, what's the other one, SimuCase? Are there Lpaa models of care in those products? Could we write them? Instruction by people who have aphasia. There's been a recent presentation and publication by Natalie Douglas about coaching as a instructional approach. Her example is with people who live in residences, in care homes for people who have dementia. But the model of teaching is to teach people who are essentially nursing aides, patient care attendants, to be more actively engaged in recognizing what would make the life of the person they're caring for better. And playing games. Do we have any games to play to learn about aphasia? At ASHA, one of the exhibitors was selling a game called Hiccup Hospital. And Hiccup Hospital is a game focused at an interprofessional team. So those of you that are doing interprofessional education, this product is out there. And I did buy it. And what's good about it is that it comes with a bunch of blank cards that you can personalize. So shouldn't we be personalizing some of those cards with questions about Lpaa for the interprofessional team to play? And then you. There's lots of presentations today and tomorrow on how you are innovating and how you are teaching. And we're really, as a committee, very eager to learn more about what you're doing. And that's just what Jess is going to do next, is to learn more about what you're doing so that we can all help each other in being able to teach this broad audience we've identified and have the adult learners learn about Lpaa.
All right, so we'd like everybody just to take a brief minute. We're going to get the hook soon. But take a minute to think about some of the tools that you've heard about already that you might be able to fold into your practice. Just about everybody at the beginning of the session said they do teach somebody about aphasia or about life participation approach to aphasia. So think about something that we've talked about today you might be able to fold into your teaching practice. Just take a moment to jot that down. And then at the end, maybe share it with your neighbor. But while you're doing that, also think about where those gaps are. What might be helpful, what might be missing. And that brings us to this next piece, and the piece that we're really excited to talk about. Sandy earlier talked about the evolution of our project, and now we need feedback to figure out what the needs are to help us give direction to where we're going next. So there are two things I'd like to talk about this afternoon. One is on the Aphasia Access academic modules page, right above, it's just one line that's right above the first module. It says, please give us your feedback, click here. And what it brings you to is a 10-question, 10-item SurveyMonkey survey. The link is here, and a small snippet is here. It's a brief survey. The survey is live. We'd love to get feedback from people who are using it, the modules who might be using the modules, and again, what else might be helpful to support your teaching practice about this. So yeah, some of them are multiple choice, some of them are open-ended. It's really brief, and we really, really value your feedback. The other thing, this is the point where we brainstorm today. So I'd like you to take a look at your note sheet. The third item down, the third question from the top asks for sharing some suggestions. And we're moving into the piece that woke me up before 5 o'clock this morning, that hopefully it all works out. So this one doesn't work, but, is it possible to click the dismiss, please? Okay, so this is our live brainstorming that we're trying to get everybody's ideas together on the big screens. And there are 2 ways to do so. So if this is the point where usually I'm always asking my students to put their phones away, but please, if you have a phone or you're able to text, please take it out. There are 2 ways to participate in this brainstorming process. One is if you open your browser and go to pollev.com/jwelsh403, it gives you an opportunity to add to the conversation, or you can send a text to 2233, and then in the body of the text, you're putting in jwelsh403, and then once that goes through, you access this poll, and then you send your suggestions through the text messaging. So I'll give you a couple minutes. People are not limited to 1 suggestion, so if you have multiple suggestions, please send multiple texts. And we'll see what's on everybody's minds in a moment.
Could you frame again, these are suggestions for?
Oh, suggestions for where we're going to go next. Looking forward for our module project. What tools we might be able to help create to support your teaching about LPA. Yet. Let me see. It is live. And it did work 3 minutes before we came up here. Yay, more videos. Let's see what else other people are thinking. Group therapy ideas, sample scripts or pitches for different communities, group therapy tools. Oh, this is wonderful. How to connect the field of clinical psychology, wow, that's really important. Simulation education with medical students. Keep these ideas coming. In Simucase. So as these ideas are coming up, it looks like we have a wide variety of things to explore. We definitely have our work cut out for us in the next few months. But does anyone in the audience or anyone on the panel want to comment about these future directions or suggestions for tools where we should go forward with this?
Oh, we're coming.
Yeah.
I'd like to just make a comment that the original charge was to try to think about pre-professional preparation. I mean, that was the original charge, thinking about pre-professional preparation, what was going on in classrooms, so that the next generation of speech-language pathologists graduating would not leave without at least being acquainted with life participation approaches to aphasia. And that's why the academic modules were created. Not meant to replace anything, but to be an adjunct, to be something that could be infused, to be something that could be added to the already full curriculum. But the committee is interested in your feedback, definitely, of is it useful? Is it working? Even if you take a piece of it.
And we have a good problem right now. Someone just said we maxed out on ideas. The poll everywhere can field right now. So please keep the ideas coming. This is a conversation that we want to continue. We're pretty much out of time. We'd like to talk more about this either after, or our contact information is at the top of that handout. So please send us emails. Let's keep this conversation going, and hopefully this won't be the last you hear from us. Yeah.
On the survey that she had spoken that was regarding the learning modules, the last question is, what other ideas do you have? So that is another way tonight when you're thinking or after this that you can add in. If we can no longer get any more this way, you can go on that survey and just use that last box and say what your other ideas are.
Yes, thank you. So this is the end for now. We really hope to be able to report back in 2 years on where we've gone with the ideas that you've shared here today. And we hope to see you at the next summit. Good afternoon. Thank you.